Okay. So while everyone's settling in, I want to take this time to introduce myself. My name is Caroline Campbell, and I am the marketing manager at IGI Global. I will be serving as the moderator of this overall panel. But I wanted to personally thank you for joining us today for the Neapolitan session, Sustainable Open Access Approaches, Benefits for Researchers, Librarians, and Publishers. And I know a lot of you are very excited to start hearing about this discussion. And at this time, I'd like to introduce our speakers. This afternoon, we have Ms. Diane Fulkerson, which is the Director of Library Services at the University of South Florida, Sarasota, Manatee. We also have Ms. Julia Gelfand, who is Applied Science and Engineering Librarian at the University of California, Irvine. We have Mr. Kevin Sayre, who is an advisor at ProQuest. And then lastly, we have Dr. Mehdi Khazarpour, who is the president and CEO of IGI Global. So we will have an opportunity to, as you know, to have a live Q&A session with the panel members after the overall presentation. So if you could hold all of your questions until the very end, and then I will go ahead and hand it off to Diane to get us started. Thank you.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. So I'm going to give you a little overview about the history of open access. And between 2002 and 2004, there were three open access initiatives: the Budapest, the Bethesda Statement, and the Berlin Declaration on Open Access. And out of those three initiatives came some common goals that form the foundation for open access. And first one is to remove price barriers, which are restrictive. If you can't afford the information, you're not gonna be able to obtain access to it. Remove the permissions, the copyright barriers, the licensing that also impedes dissemination of information. And last but not least, the only limitation that they wanted to include as part of those initiatives was attribution. So if you're going to reuse it, you're going to share it, please provide the proper attribution. So from there, what came out of those initiatives was also somewhat of a common definition. And that definition is, in the simplest form, is this: that open access publications are digital, they're online, they're free of charge, and free of most copyright and licensing restrictions. So also, we ended up with, there's several different types of models that you can publish your open access materials under. We have green, gold, gratis, Libra, and diamond, and these are just a few. Each one of the different models, publishing models, have different restrictions, licensing fees, access to that information. So for instance, if you were to publish under the green format, it would be freely available online in a repository, such as, a Scholar Commons, your institutional repository, versus gratis and Libra, which gratis, it's free to read, but reuse is restricted. And the Libra is available under open license, so a Creative Commons type of license. In a 2018 Peer J article, they did a study of what types of models open access publications were the dominant publication model. And of that, they found 14.3% of open access articles were published as gold. And gold is the final version is freely available immediately after publication. So that was the primary publication point. But along with the open access publication model came APCs, or article processing charges. And most of those article processing charges, the minimum is usually around $1,000, but they can go upwards of $3,000, $4,000. And those processing charges, for the most part, are not funded by most institutions. And the author, the faculty member, whoever, is responsible for coming up with the money to fund those processing charges. The downside to the open access publication movement has been predatory publishers. And for years, we all know Jeffrey Beals published a list of predatory publishers, journal publishers. And these journals, while seeming to be legitimate, are not. They don't have a solid editorial review board. They don't have a peer review process for the most part. And so oftentimes, and I'm sure many of us in the room have received the spam email, oh, please come publish with us. And then you go and look, and they are not a legitimate publisher. So that's the downside to open access. So what comes next? And part of that is, and Julia will get into this further in her part of the presentation, is one is identifying open access journals with impact factors that faculty can publish in. And as librarians and in library services, that's part of our role, is helping the faculty, if they're coming up for tenure and promotion, to be able to work with them, to help them find those publications, open access publications, that they would want to publish in. And then part of that also is the support. What additional support can we give to the faculty in terms of, not only just identifying a journal, but then also being able to maybe help them find funding or other means which they can use to publish their materials in. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Julia.
Which way am I going?
There you go.
No, next one. Okay, so in this oversimplified slide, I sort of have broken it down into basically the inevitability of open access. Currently today, numbers range from 30 to 40, 45% at the high end of what the output is that is currently open access. But we speculate that over the next decade, for sure, it'll increase to well over 70%. And a majority of content will be open access. And one of the hues or flavors that Diane just mentioned and that we're increasingly familiar with. But those ranges are going to change as the opportunities offer new possibilities in the publishing marketplace. But we're trying to really think what the second part of this slide was how will it continue to offer or serve as an equalizer to access. And we're really convinced that it will provide additional options for libraries, especially those that may not have the strongest or the most robust collections, but they still need to provide access to content that they don't have. So traditionally, we know that the next slide will illustrate the routes that libraries have taken from traditional services to new ones. Also, I think libraries will continue to explore and learn from investing in new publishing models. And that could be through their consortia. It could be through lots of things, such as working with authors and publishers to develop new sustainable models for collection work and, for more importantly, access at the article level. So extending that access and equalizing it and distributing it beyond the traditional ways that we have of normalizing to underdeveloped countries and pricing models, we'll see an access models change. So what do we have and what will influence our work? There are lots of perceptions here. So some of the traditional services that libraries have depended on, such as interlibrary loan and more recently different challenges and opportunities with document supply services, more free copies will be available to users that they will be able to call up without any means of intervention. And that is a welcome situation for libraries. We'll also see increasingly efforts to collaborate and share discovery systems through sharing of metadata. So here at this conference alone, there have been many, many sessions devoted to how new ILS discovery layers are getting deeper, wider access through scaling metadata in different ways. And this will pull up resources and offer access to people about at least informing them that materials are available. And the more open access they are, the more successful readers will be to self-help that way. Institutional repositories will continue to be important roles and play not just for the library, but for the campus, and will diffuse the situation that libraries are buying back information that was created on their own, within their own institution by their own affiliates. And this situation is for those institutions that already have or are developing open access mandates, they will continue to play a big role. And increasingly, libraries are managing and providing the software and the technology and the skill sets to build and make institutional repositories successful. And as we said, the ILS and the discovery layers from outside technology, with outside technologies, and from a variety of companies will make those opportunities, I think, more plentiful and robust as technologies continue to emerge. So libraries are increasingly defining themselves in a publishing role, and library as publisher is a keen concept these days that libraries are taking on. We see a number of university presses now merged with libraries. We see lots of options, and some of those basic functions of publishing and hosting will continue to increase. We definitely see new positions about publishing consultants within libraries. Scholarly communications has broadened that scope, and lots of things. So you're seeing overlay systems are important. Libraries need to manage and to be aware of what those new trends are, the new potential, and we're going to see sort of more of that, perhaps complicating the scene, but at least reinforcing it. So the role of the funder is also going to be, I think, more important here, and libraries are thinking and exploring ways that they can bridge gaps for authors and researchers to make their material open access, publish where they think they need to be published, and to, however libraries can help to bridge the gaps. They're beginning to explore that more and more. So the final situation here, in my mind, is how do we grow and expand this in a very sustainable way? I think we need to know the costs, the financial implications, and the potential economics for this, and the next speaker is going to address more and more about the ways that we can consider implementation.
All right, thank you, Julie. So full disclosure, as you heard earlier, my name is Kevin Sayer. My background is actually, I co-founded eBrary, and I ran the books division and the software division for ProQuest for a number of years, not in journals. And as you know, books are the early stages of open access, not super applicable today. But I was excited to speak today because I think there's obviously, based on what you just heard from Julie, there's a paradigm shift taking place. And there are a lot of parallels between what happened in books in the recent years in terms of the shift from print to electronic, the economics around that, the costs involved around that, and what we're seeing now with open access. So it's a very dynamic market right now, and the conditions are changing rapidly. But I wanted to thank my colleagues in the publishing industry and the library market for helping me kind of understand those dynamics and approaching this. So, the first thing that I thought made the most amount of sense to me, or that what struck me, was that there's quite a bit involved in scholarly publications. When I was going through the activities, what's required in order to achieve the outcome or the goals, there's no shortage of activities here. And so what also became apparent is that early in the process was that publications and journal brands play a pretty significant role if you want to achieve those goals. And there's some pretty lofty goals. There's a robust workflow. If you look at the scholarly publications column, there's a pretty robust workflow established, and part of the heavy lifting here is really in the peer review process, to validate the research, to actually distribute it, disseminate it to the researchers that are looking for this information, and then really to preserve the actual work. And it comes as no surprise, I don't think, to anybody that the more prestigious journal brands have more rigorous standards. They have higher rejection rates, but it can often lead to much bigger discoveries or breakthroughs. But ultimately, if we really want to achieve the outcome, the goals are pretty substantial in terms of the promotion of new discoveries. There's author recognition in terms of, ultimately it can even lead to a Nobel Prize. There's financial security in terms of, achieving tenure. There's financial rewards in terms of the IP associated with a lot of these discoveries. So there's really a lot at stake in this ecosystem. And the thing we want to make sure is that we preserve the right activities if we're going to achieve these outcomes. So looking at how OA might impact this, the first thing, with open access is that it certainly impacts the publications, kind of in the workflow. There's areas that it impacts there. The journal brands themselves, you heard from Julie earlier. But it's really not intended to affect or impact in a negative way the scholarly communications. So although the goals haven't changed, we are seeing some changes that might undermine kind of achieving those goals. So specifically what I was talking about is that, where their cost is, there's also value creation. And if you look at the standard rigor around the peer review process, it's incredibly costly, and they're much lower rejection rates, and as a result of that, we're seeing much higher volumes of articles being published and flooding the market. I might be out of line, I'm coming out of left field a little bit on this one, but the chances are if any of you have a PhD and are at all networked in the academic market, someone's approached you to publish an article. And I think that trend is something that's emerging more and more as we see OA take root. So given the increase in the volume of the articles that we're seeing, it's impacting our ability to discover the right research materials. It's impacting the usage, which is the ultimate denominator when it comes to assessing value. And so those are all things that are happening, as OA kind of shifts into the marketplace. So getting into the cost, understanding that we still want to achieve those goals, the first thing that I learned is that there's an expectation, in the marketplace, and it's definitely a perception that the cost of OA scholarly publication should be significantly lower. But when you really dig in and really look, and if you want to achieve those outcomes, the reality of it is that the cost is really just being distributed, at least at this stage. Like I was talking about in the print to e-transition, in the early days, there was very similar perceptions. The expectation was that if we're moving to e, the cost would be substantially lower, and the cost of the material should come down. At the early stages, over time, you can see some of those benefits, but the early stages, that definitely was not the case. In fact, if anything, it was more expensive because you were actually doing both. Now, it's true that publishers can leverage pre-existing costs of publishing and hosting platforms, but these savings are really being offset when it comes to the editorial process, when it comes to the peer review costs, and it's really due to the increase in volume that we're seeing. That in turn has caused publishers to really shift their focus away from libraries and more so, like we heard earlier, to authors for compensation and charging them those APC charges. And you heard it can go up to anywhere from $1,000 to $5,000. I've seen all the way up to $5,000 for higher end kind of prestigious, selective, high impact factor venues like a Nature Communications. But the competitive pricing can be as low as $1,000, and it can range all the way from $1,000 to $3,000. And you'd think, well, is this going to stifle the marketplace? But authors have really shown a propensity to pay these fees. And it's a primary way in which pure OA publishers generate income. However, the costs associated with the editorial and the peer review process that we were talking about earlier make it really difficult for emerging OA publishers to generate any profits. And they really rely on other sources of income, like we've heard. But so many, OA publishing venues are not for profit. They're not financially self-sustainable, and they're funded by grants, societies, and universities. And all this has a big implication or impact for libraries. So these pressures that we're seeing, have, has libraries actually trying to help publishers, and I'm sorry, trying to help authors pay these APC fees and meet funder mandates. So libraries are starting to adjust their cost factors, their cost structures. You're having to, you know this better than I do, you're having to evaluate the individual publications, the quality of access that you're getting to them, the services associated with them, and in many cases, you're diverting traditional subscription budgets to fund APCs. Or one of these emerging models. There's no shortage of emerging models. There's no shortage of emerging models that are flooding the marketplace. Now, just like in the early days of kind of the transition from print to electronic and the book market, this can be pretty challenging. We had a lot of new business models, and really the job at hand was to try to find those models that were sustainable for the entire marketplace. And fair value exchange, meeting at the point in time where value is being created, there's the right price point for that. Now, even though it's challenging, the good news is that there's clearly a lot of momentum here. You're seeing the volume of the publications, and you're starting to see a lot of optionality in terms of different models that are emerging that might help solve the problem, but it needs to be sustainable. Now, I've had a lot of experience and a lot of failures, frankly, over the years with business models and ones that can be sustainable over time, and there's a lot of learning to do. But these market dynamics are actually pretty ripe for coming up for the right solution. And so it's just the approach and whether it works for the marketplace, and the only way to do it is to actually test out different models. Now, I'm pretty keen to hand this over to Dr. Horsopur next, because I think IGI Global has really come up with something that's clever. And I think that it really has some legs underneath it, and it could be a sustainable model. But the real challenge is going to be to see whether it works for not just for the libraries, but for the publishers, and see other publishers follow suit. So at this point, I'll hand it over, and I'm keen to see what kind of questions might emerge from all of this. Thanks.
Thank you, Kevin. Good morning. As Kevin mentioned, there are different source of funding when it comes to OA, and it should not be any surprise to anybody to see that majority of OA projects are funded by faculty, by researchers. In many cases, they pay out of different grants and funding and whatever, but what we have seen as a publisher of 175 journals, majority of those fees come directly out of their pockets because they want to publish in more OA. Other sources would be outside grant funding, institution administration funds. The libraries are very much involved in the funding process. Relevant departments have fund allocated for funding OA projects, and then unknown, which are societies, grants, government agencies, and others. We have even seen, for example, endowment used as source of funding for OA cases. Now, in order to bring some perspective in terms of what is the cost of OA funding when libraries get involved, and it's not an inexpensive process, we have chosen a case of University of Edinburgh in Scotland. Back in 2016 and 2017, they have decided to fund, or altogether they funded 965 articles for a total cost of $1,388,423 US, which included $1,354,840 was the direct APC charges, and then the publishers that publish those articles, also charge them for additional page and color changes and other additional fees. Now, if you look at what they could have done with that amount of money, to just put it in right perspective, they could have purchased about 13,884 books on average, with average price of 100, or they could have subscribed to 27,776 journal subscription with average subscription price of $500. So it's a very expensive operations for a university of this size to get involved in supporting OA, project. Now, what is a possible solution to perhaps offset this particular? I mean, APC is, as I indicated, is a costly process. It could be a costly process for university, but what are the possible solutions? An open access model that supports all publishers to achieve the following goals: credible channel for researchers to publish their work under open access, create an additional source of APC funding, assist librarians in not falling in the hands of predatory open access journals, and then at the same time assist the publisher to publish more and more open access content. The ultimate goal basically is publishers should look at how they can take the investment from librarians for their publications and reinvest them into open access movement in a manner that benefits librarians, their institutions, their faculty, as well as publishers. As a publishing company with 30 years, perhaps we are one of the few independent publishing businesses left in this industry, which has its own plus and negatives. The plus side is that we're not controlled by conglomerate. There are a lot of innovative approaches we take. We can take those innovative approaches without worrying about a headquarters shutting us down. And we looked at, some of the data that we were dealing with. Believe it or not, at any given time, as a publisher of 175 journals, we're sitting on hundreds of cases where the authors of accepted articles that have gone through the review process. We are a full member of COPE, Committee on Publishing Ethics, so our process is as rigid as you can imagine. And at any given time, we deal with hundreds of cases of authors who have chosen OA model to publish their work, but they have trouble finding fundings. And sometimes these cases go on for 6 months, even 12 months, where the author is trying to find the needed funding, or they cannot afford to pay that out of their own pocket. And what that happens, the article is not published. Because if they have decided to go with OA and telling us that, I'm going to pay for that $1,500, which is our average charge, and the money is not paid, then article is basically put on hold. So what we have come up with, we basically come up with a simple solution to subsidize some of these costs. And I'm being honest with you, being in business for 30 years, and plus I come from academic side. Part of me is academician, part of me is business. I think the good side is on the academic side, the bad side is on the business side. And I'm being honest with you, I think publishers in general been absent in this whole AA movement and perhaps dealing with the cost of OA movement, because we just basically switch from charging libraries subscription fees to collect the money from authors or researchers as under auspices of APC, fees. So what we basically come up with is we announced this program about 6 months ago. IGI Global now is offering a program that allows the faculty and institution whose libraries subscribe to InfoSci-Journals, which is our database of 175 hybrid open access scholarly journals, to have an allocated open access article processing charge, APC fund, that matches the investment that the library puts into InfoSci-Journal database. Simple process. Example, if a library invests $4,500 in subscribing to our InfoSci-Journal for 2019, IGI Global will create an open access fund equal to $4,500 US dollar, which will allow 3 articles. Our current processing fee is $1,500. Faculty of that institution for 2019, when their work submitted and accepted into one of the 175 current hybrid journals of InfoSci-Journal collections. So that basically allows that institution, what we are saying is that the money that is paid for that, and as Kevin mentioned, there is good, better cost involved in producing quality content. Believe it or not, I don't want to downplay it, but the process is a lot of times is like a manufacturing process. Except as the publishers, we are manufacturing, we are producing quality. And now, a quality content means the content has to be validated. And putting that content through validation process costs money, period. I mean, you have to pay to a staff, you have to basically, sometime an article can go through 3-4 rounds of, review, revision, and copy editing and everything else. So this way, basically, what we're saying that whatever the university is paying us, we're putting that money back, making it available for that library to be used in support of their faculty's publishing. The process, as described here, libraries invest in IGI Global InfoSci-Journal. IGI Global creates the open access APC fund, which is a dollar amount that matches the total dollar amount invested. The author or faculty members submit their article under open access to a journal within InfoSci-Journals. The peer review process is conducted, and the article, excuse me, and the article is accepted or rejected. Either article is accepted or rejected. If the article is accepted, then the author of that university can basically use the fund that was allocated for that university investment in InfoSci-Journal and subsidize or pay for the APC. So we will probably move a lot of people from our account receivables who owe us the fee, and we already have done that. And now, if the article is rejected, then the APC fund that was allocated stays as it is. It's not going to go anywhere. We're not basically saying that now we have to take that amount out. Now, the current OA model, I will read it for you here because the print is small. Authors submit a paper. Paper goes through the review process. Paper is either accepted or rejected. If the paper is accepted, then the APC is requested, and then author seeks for funding to pay for the APC funds. Once the fee is paid, then the article is basically published. Under our current proposed model, or the model that we are using now, authors submit papers go through review process, and if it's accepted or rejected, if it's accepted, then basically author can use the fund that was allocated for that particular university in support of the APC, so they don't owe us any money. And the number of articles that can go through that process, as I said, would be equal to the amount of money that was invested. What are the pros and cons? Greater library research collaboration. It allows libraries basically to show to their faculty that, yes, through the investment that the library is making in that library, in our database, they can also benefit from it from OA point of view. Libraries will receive more out of their investment. It provides an additional source for APC funding. We're not saying this is going to be the only source of funding. Library faculty or researchers still have options of looking into other sources. This is an additional source of OA funding. And then there are no restrictions based on the level of investment, and neither there's no embargo. Now, on the con side, institution risk not getting the full scope of the benefits. The period that the fund is good for is for a period that that subscription was good for. So if they pay for 2019, during that 2019, they can use the fund. Now, if they renew it, then again, the same amount of fund will be allocated for the following year. For libraries that are not invested in IGI Global InfoSci-Journal, their faculty cannot take advantage of this because we are making this only available to those who invest in our databases. And then potential lack of diversity from the participation from researchers from developing countries who can, those schools that in developing countries that cannot afford to subscribe, and obviously they would be in disadvantage. In summary, this program allows publishers to invest more into the open access movement, provides research an additional source for funding for APCs, allows libraries to benefit from investment and access to the content, and then also provides more open access content available to researchers all over the world. We are not actually experimenting this program. This program been in place for 6 months, and we have seen tremendous amount of positive response to this program. And we're hoping that perhaps other publishers will follow suit. Because if you notice in the case of University of Edinburgh, where 53% of the open access projects that they funded went to 3 publishers. And most likely, those publishers also charge University of Edinburgh for access to the databases that those journals were included. So it's a double whammy. That is a simple reality. And I think, what we are saying is that perhaps, it's about time for us as the publishers to make some of, we're not paying any libraries back in cash, but what we're saying that faculty don't have to also pay for APCs and then at the same time pay for the subscription of those journals that are included in our database. We open the floor for any questions, any suggestions.
I was gonna say, okay. I was like,
Okay.
I didn't go away.
Thank you.
Then at this time, we're gonna go ahead and open the floor for questions. If you just wanna raise your hand and I can pass off the mic.
Bob Holly, I'm a retired professor of library science from Wayne State University who continues to publish. I'm an open access heretic in this area. My main connection with my library currently is access to library literature and paywall publications. If 80% of publications that I would use become open access, and if discovery tools are created that provide me with efficient access to these materials, I'm going to have much less connection with the library, and I worry that this is a potential development that will be an unexpected negative consequence. I also have never had to pay an APC charge. If I did, I could afford it. And so I worry that some of the things that were described today will lead to less faculty commitment to their academic libraries.
You want me to?
Thank you for that comment. I am not a library administrator at the highest end, but I can say that libraries are concerned about the relationships it has with its users and the disambiguation of that already involves apparently the case. What we want, we're seeing less. What we want is quite different than what we see. We're seeing less visibility of users in the library as they depend more and more on remote content. They're communicating with us through remote means, and so we're already seeing some of that. I'm not sure that I agree that it will completely block things off because, again, you're getting access because the library has a subscription. And that kind of branding is increasing, I think, on our websites, on our access. You know where it's coming from. Even if it's open access in a hybrid situation, not everything is. So I think subscription, will it change I think it'll potentially change the nature of subscriptions. It could increase it could encourage a library to increase publications if they thought that this was a source where their faculty would want to publish and it was intense enough to match, or it could potentially decline and we would only get open access content. But I definitely feel that it's a model to explore and to see what the consequences are just after 6 months to see the growth. I think it's already seen that there's potential for some
I'm
adoption.
assuming, you're assuming that if a library is not subscribed to our database, does not have access to open access content that we publish, and that's not correct. The minute we publish an open access article, that article is automatically available on our website. Yeah, it's available on our website for you to access regardless your library is subscribed to our database or not. All publishers do that, because when open access becomes available, I'm assuming everyone do, but what we do is the minute your library, you or anybody else pay for that open access, that article becomes freely available on our website to anybody to use it, regardless you paid for subscription or not subscriptions. So we are not basically putting limitation on distribution of open access or your privilege to access that open access. All I'm saying is that we are offering this additional source of funding for those faculty or researchers, such as yourself, which I was in your position a long time ago, to be able to pay for funding. Because the truth of the matter is, a lot of hundreds of people that work even associated with us that are having problems to find the fundings. That's all we're doing, basically. We're providing additional source of funding.
So you're kind of proving my point that I won't need the library because I can go to your database.
And I was going to say,
Yeah, you can, it's open access. You can go to our database, and I'm not, denying that.
going to say, we can always follow up with you with a little bit more information as well after the presentation, and you can
Yes.
get in contact with some of our speakers. We do have that contact information to continue this conversation, but I want to make sure we're able to get to all the other questions that we have.
Lev Rickard, Santa Clara University. I wonder if you can pull the curtain back a bit more and drill down into some more concrete examples about the costs associated with certification and validation of research.
I mean, the cost basically, as a publishing house, there are certain stages that an article has to go. Either you submit your article to one of our refereed journals or books. The minute an article is accepted, okay, yes, there is an editor-in-chief of that journal that is responsible to conduct the process. But as a publishers, we provide development editors, assigned development editors to that person, and that person uses our technology. We have a very advanced system known as EED, editorial discovery system, that is our manuscript submission systems. Now, keeping up with that, and then the support that we provide to put that papers through the process, either that papers, as Kevin mentioned, the volume of, if you compare the volume of manuscripts that we receive these days, and we don't make any, there's no process, application fees or processing fees for any of our journals whatsoever. Any given time, I'm actually, editor-in-chief of 6 of our journals. One of those journals is International Journal of Information Security and Privacy. In a given month, we could have easily 200, 250 manuscripts submitted, to that. Now, putting to those manuscripts have to go to initial, review to make sure it is related to the content before you send it out for review. And then sending, 200, 250 manuscripts to 3 to 4 reviewers, and all the reminders that we have to send. I always said that college professor claimed that the students are procrastinators. They're the worst. And the number of reminders that we have to send and say, by the way, this review was due, 2 weeks ago, please send us review. And those guys are not getting paid, so they're doing volunteer work. But the staff, and then once the manuscript is accepted or it goes to revision process, the copy editing, and then the typesetting, and then, making it available either in print or in electronic format, adding to our databases. All those stages basically costing the publishing house certain amounts of costs that we have to deal with. And that's, the advantage that we have, because we're not part of a conglomerate, we're very cost conscientious. Our offices are not in Amsterdam or New York City, Hershey, Pennsylvania. Still, expensive, but not that expensive. but you still, have to basically, keep up with all the other expenses. I mean, we kept our APC charge at the minimum, which is $1,500, considered to be low in comparison to $5,000 or $6,000 that I have heard. But those are some of the costs associated with processing, basically, manuscript before they become publishable.
And just to add to that, it's really all over the place, which makes it really difficult to pull the curtain back, as you say. IGI runs a pretty lean, business, and so they're able to actually leverage that. But the one thing that I found as a common denominator amongst publishers is that where there are efficiencies or economies of scale, it's really in the platform and the hosting side and the technical side, actually. And so the more the workflow that's automated, the more the workflow that is seamless, the more opportunity it gives those publishers to be able to leverage that. But one thing you can't get around if you want quality is that peer review process, and also the editorial work. There's just a lot of domain expertise there that no matter how small you are, how big you are, if you want a quality product, you're just not going to get around it. And so you're just not going to avoid costs, and that was the main point.
Okay, I was going to say.
Any other questions?
Hopefully, we'll be able to get through 2 more questions before they kick us out of the room. I know you had one.
I just had a follow-up question to the professor sitting next, or 2 doors down from me. Do you participate in your institutional repository? That is a relationship with your library.
Right.
Okay, I didn't say it would disappear, I just said it would become less.
Right.
Okay.
I'm Crystal Hampson from the University of Saskatchewan. I was interested in asking if you would be willing to share, were there other models that you also considered for applying open access to your journals, and if so, what?
We will be looking into possibility of applying the same model to our InfoSci books, which is collection of about 4,500 books that we currently included in that book, and we publish some around like 800 books a year now, all reference titles. But I think as a publishing house, in my particular opinion, we have to become much more involved in finding solutions to deal with this open access. I think in many ways, a lot of larger publishing houses assume that, the business model changed. And they then want to assume that or accept the fact that we are part of the equation. We cannot basically ignore our responsibility. So we are looking for ways to see perhaps how we can become more involved while we basically also retain our business, survival. Because at the end of the day, we still have to, stay in business, in order to do what we do. And this, it took us almost like probably 3 years before we could, nail it down to see, what the problem is. And when we looked at the data, it became very clear to us that we can contribute or we can remedy some of the biggest problem or source of funding, which is author contributions. And as you saw in one of the charts, majority of the funding for these OA projects is coming from these fellows. So why not just basically, put some of the money back in support of what they wanted to do, so that can, provide remedy to the library and the institutions that they are involved. But I'm sure, if you stay tuned, there will be additional solution that we will probably come up with next few years.
Okay, I apologize to everyone whose questions we didn't get to, but actually on our next slide, we have all the contact speaker information. We also have some literature up at the front going a little bit more deeper into our program, and definitely feel free to talk to any of our speakers while we're here. But I want to thank you very much, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your conference.
Thank you very much.